Do you know what it means to fight a war that lasts for centuries? Generations are born and die, and the sword never leaves your neck. We're not talking about a petty neighborhood feud. We're talking about a clash of titans that split the world in two: Persia and Rome. Two superpowers, each convinced the earth wasn't big enough for anyone but them, grinding each other down until nothing was left whole. And here's the twist. The same script seems to be replaying today in an updated version between Iran and America. Same places, same interests, except now the sword is a missile and the catapult is a drone. In this video, we're telling the story from the beginning, why the conflict started, the battles that soaked the earth in blood, and how the Quran immortalized this rivalry in the chapter called The Romans, predicting the outcome before it even happened. Grab your coffee, find a quiet spot, because what you're about to hear isn't just history, it's a key to understanding. The Roman conflict was never just a border war. It was a clash of DNA, a battle for survival between the mystical mindset of the East and the organized mindset of the West. To understand this story, we need to look inside both empires and see how each climbed to the peak of power before their final, fatal collision. The Persians weren't just a people who settled the Iranian plateau. They were the owners of the oldest imperial dream in human history. When we talk about the Persians, we're talking about a people almost genetically wired for pride and dominance. The Persians saw themselves as children of light, their race the Aryan, the noble ones, and anyone outside. It began with the Achaemenids, who built the world's first true global empire, continued through the Parthians, who drove Rome mad with frustration, and reached its peak with the Sassanids. The Persians were Zoroastrians, worshippers of fire as a symbol of divine wisdom. They kept a sacred flame burning at the temple of Azar-Gashnasp for thousands of years, and carried a torch from it at the head of their armies to bless the troops before battle. Militarily, they invented the cataphract, armored horse and rider, both encased in overlapping steel plates like fish scales, so dense that arrows would strike them and simply bounce off like they'd hit solid rock. They had the Immortals, 10,000 elite soldiers, and the moment one fell, another instantly took his place. They imported war elephants from India and trained them for one purpose: to crush enemy infantry underfoot.
The Persians were as skilled in diplomacy as they were savage in war, and their dream never faded: to restore the borders of their ancestor Darius, stretching from the heart of Europe to Egypt. On the other side stood Rome, a completely different story in realism and rigor. The Romans we're discussing here are the Byzantines, the Eastern Roman Empire, capital Constantinople. The Romans didn't share Persia's mysticism and spiritual flourish. Rome's people were built on law, engineering, and system. Their true strength was never individual heroism, it was the system itself. The Roman legion was a machine that moved like clockwork. Every legionary was conditioned to move as part of a whole. His rectangular shield, the scutum, locking with his neighbors to form an unbreakable human wall. The Romans were masters of military engineering, capable of building a fortified camp with trenches and walls in a single night, and capable of besieging a city for years using siege towers and catapults. 11 labs. Rome had its own superiority complex too, one built on citizenship and law. The Roman emperor, the Basileus, saw himself as the protector of the civilized world, and after the empire adopted Orthodox Christianity as the foremost defender of the cross. Constantinople was the pearl of the world, Wawru the city of the triple walls, the Theodosian walls, that no army managed to breach for 1,000 years, Aruwaru, and the city of gold, buying off kings and tribes before ever raising a sword. Rome also held a chemical secret weapon of terrifying power: Greek fire, a liquid that burned even on water and turned enemy fleets to ash in seconds. No one outside Rome ever cracked its formula. To Rome, the Persians were arrogant barbarians. To Persia, the Romans were organized thieves. These two giants simply could not share a single planet in peace. The lands between them, Ado-Iraq, the Levant and Armenia, Agoros, became the grinder that wore both sides down for centuries. Persia wanted its borders back at the Mediterranean to control the world. Rome wanted the Silk Road to fund its armies with the wealth flowing from China and India. This wasn't a border dispute. It was a clash of civilizations in the fullest sense. It was a struggle between the Persian crown and the Roman cross, between absolute Eastern centralism and organized Western bureaucracy. And this hatred wasn't born overnight. It was bred into the bloodline, going back to the days of Persia and Greece. Every Roman soldier grew up hearing the story of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. Every Persian soldier dreamed of the day he'd burn Constantinople, just as Alexander once burned Persepolis. So the two empires kept tearing each other apart for 700 years. 700 years, think about that number, paid for in gold and blood, never realizing that this war of attrition would ultimately leave them both exposed to a third force rising from the heart of the Arabian desert. A force that would change the face of the world forever. Now let's walk the timeline battle by battle. From the first clash at Carrhae, to Rome's defeat at Edessa, to the meat grinder of Antioch, all the way to the great final showdown between Khosrow and Heraclius. Nobody saw coming. It started with a man named Marcus Crassus, the richest man in Rome and its greatest schemer, who decided he wanted to write his name in history with blood, not gold. Crassus was consumed with envy over the glories of Julius Caesar and Pompey, so he took 7 Roman legions, around 40,000 soldiers, and marched into the heart of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, to crush the first great Persian empire of the era, the Parthians. Crassus marched in with overwhelming confidence, assuming the Persians were just desert nomads who'd break at the first sight of Rome. What awaited him instead was an unrelenting nightmare. Persia sent one of its sharpest commanders, the young general Serena, with just 10,000 horsemen. 40,000 Romans against 10,000 Persians, but Serena didn't fight with brute force. He fought with his mind, using a legendary tactic, the Parthian shot. His horse archers would charge toward the Romans, fire, then wheel their horses away and retreat, and while fleeing, twist their upper bodies backward to fire a second, deadly accurate shot. The Romans stood locked in their formations, unable to close the distance, as arrows rained down without end. Crassus waited for the Persian archers to run dry, but Serena had planned for that too, bringing camel caravans loaded with thousands of reserve arrows, turning the barrage into an endless machine. The Romans stood trapped in their iron squares as arrows tore through armor and throats. In desperation, Crassus's own son Publius led a suicidal charge. The Persians surrounded him, cut off his head, and raised it on a spear in front of his father's eyes. That was the moment Rome's army lost its mind and the total collapse began. The battle ended in a massacre. 20,000 Romans dead, 10,000 captured. Crassus himself tried to flee. The Persians caught him and killed him. Legend says Serena ordered molten gold poured down his throat, mocking his legendary greed. Feast on the gold you were so desperate for. Crassus's severed head was sent to the Persian king in Ctesiphon. This was the shock that taught Rome the Euphrates was a red line, and that Persia had tactics capable of turning the world's finest legions into piles of corpses in the sand. That, my friend, was only the beginning. Rome doesn't forget an insult easily. Centuries after Carrhae, just as Rome thought it had things under control, the real boogeyman appeared, Shapur I. Shapur wasn't just a king, he was a Persian hurricane, sweeping away everything in his path. In 260 CE, the Roman Emperor Valerian decided it was time to put an end to Sassanid arrogance after they began raiding Rome's eastern provinces. Valerian gathered an elite force of roughly 70,000 troops and marched toward the city of Edessa. But Shapur had a terrifying tactical trap waiting for him. By this point, Persia had perfected its cataphract cavalry to a level near flawless. When the battle began, the Romans found themselves facing walking walls of steel. Roman swords shattered against Persian armor, while arrows fell like rain. With brilliant tactical skill, Shapur completely encircled the Roman army in a narrow area and choked it into submission. What followed was something no Roman mind could have imagined. The army starved and was slaughtered, and Emperor Valerian himself was taken prisoner. Think about that sentence, the Emperor of Rome, master of the civilized world, a captive in Persian hands. It was the first and only time in history that a living Roman emperor was captured on the battlefield. Shapur didn't treat Valerian as an honored guest. He turned him into a permanent tool of humiliation for all of Rome. According to historical accounts, Shapur would have Valerian brought out in his full imperial regalia and forced him to kneel so the king could step on his back while mounting his horse. And when Valerian died in captivity, Shapur reportedly had his skin flayed, stuffed with straw, dyed red, and hung in a Persian fire temple, so that any Roman envoy who came to negotiate would see his own emperor's remains hanging before his eyes. This wasn't just a military blow, it was psychological warfare that plunged Rome into years of disorientation. Persia had proven to the world that the Sassanid crown could trample the Roman eagle whenever it pleased. Shapur commemorated the victory by carving his own image into the rock relief at Nakshi Rustam, himself on horseback, Valerian kneeling below him, begging for mercy. That carving still stands today, a testament to the day Persia crushed the pride of the Caesars. The humiliation was beyond words, and Rome would eventually have to answer for it. But would that reckoning come easily? Years after the shame of Valerian's capture, Emperor Julian decided it was time to wash away the empire's disgrace with Persian blood. Julian wasn't an ordinary commander. He modeled himself after Alexander the Great, and he assembled the largest army of his era, roughly 90,000 troops, backed by a fleet sailing up the Euphrates. The plan was suicidal in ambition. Don't fight at the border, march straight into Ctesiphon, Persia's capital, and strike at its heart. At first, Julian advanced smoothly, winning several engagements and reaching the walls of Ctesiphon itself. But there, he ran into a wall he couldn't overcome. King Shapur II, Du al-Aktaf, Lord of the Shoulders. Shapur II was a war hawk. He refused to commit his army to a decisive, direct confrontation. Instead, he used scorched earth tactics, burning crops, storehouses, and every village in the Romans' path. Julian's army found itself stranded before the towering walls of Ctesiphon, starving and thirsty under the brutal Iraqi heat. The walls wouldn't fall, the army began to break under exhaustion, and Shapur II cut off every supply route. Julian then made the worst decision of his life. He ordered his own ships burned, so his soldiers couldn't dream of retreat by river, and began withdrawing north. Persia had been waiting for exactly this moment and unleashed a brutal war of attrition against the retreating army. Persian cavalry emerged from the dust like ghosts, fired their arrows, and vanished, leaving the Romans unable to even locate an enemy to fight. On one unlucky day during a minor skirmish, Julian stepped out of his tent without his full armor. An unknown Persian arrow pierced his side and struck his liver. Julian fell from his horse, and legend holds that his last words, as he clutched his own blood and flung it toward the sky, were, "You have won, Galilean." With Julian's death, the Roman army was left leaderless deep in enemy territory. Roman commanders were forced to elect a new leader.
Congratulations! You've reached the end of this chapter, but history has more to reveal. Join us in part 2 as the story continues. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to stay updated with every new release. Thank you for watching. See you in the next documentary.